So in the first video, we talked briefly about what academic integrity is. The problem is that we tend to use a lot of big words in our policies, which can make things convoluted and confusing. So that's why in this section of the module, we're going to try and define and simplify some of those terms, hopefully make it easier for you. Now, I usually try to avoid text-heavy slides, but unfortunately, because we're doing definitions, I wasn't completely able to avoid them in this video, so I do apologize in advance. So in this module, we're going to look at some of these key definitions. We're going to look at plagiarism. We're going to look at research, citations, references, attribute or attribution, as well as citation styles. And the first thing I want to talk about is the idea of passing off someone's work as your own and not properly giving credit to other people's research. And this is known as plagiarism. And basically, plagiarism just means presenting, whether intentionally or not, the ideas, expressions of work, ideas, as basically the information from others as one's own. And it includes reproducing or paraphrasing, and we'll talk about that in a later video, portions of someone else's published or unpublished material, regardless of the source, and presenting these as one's own without proper citation or reference to the original source. So basically, you're claiming other people's ideas as your own. And I want to point out a couple of key ideas in this definition. Plagiarism can happen whether intentional or not. So just because you don't intend to plagiarize or mean to plagiarize, it can happen. The other thing is published. The works that you are citing can be either published or unpublished. So it doesn't matter whether it's from a book or a journal article, if it's from, a set of slides. Even if something is unpublished, you have to cite it because you are in risk of being of violating plagiarism and academic integrity if you don't cite things. And this is the key here, without proper citation or reference. So it's okay to talk about other people's ideas, you just have to make sure that you provide a proper citation or reference. And this is a big no-no in academics. You really don't want to put in someone else's information without citing it, and that's a huge core idea behind academic integrity. So you might be asking yourself, what constitutes plagiarism? So there's a couple different things, and this is not exhaustive, but it is just a starting list. If we think about any submission prepared in whole or in part by someone else, so you're submitting someone else's work as your own, that constitutes plagiarism. Using ideas or direct verbatim quotations, so exact quotations, paraphrase materials, algorithms, formula, scientific or mathematical concepts, or ideas without appropriate acknowledgement in any academic assignment. Also, using another's data or research findings without appropriate acknowledgement. Remember, we do need to cite everything. Submitting a computer program developed in whole or in part by someone else, with or without modifications, as one's own. And remember, failing to acknowledge sources through the use of proper citations when using another's work, or failing to use quotation marks. And this is, again, taken right from Carleton University's academic integrity policies. Now, I want to segue slightly for a moment before returning to the idea of plagiarism. And as I mentioned in the previous video, you're now part of a scholarly community. And being part of that scholarly community means that you're doing a lot of different things, and one of the major undertakings of this community is conducting research. So research is used to find things out, reaffirm the results of previous work, or solve new or existing problems, but also supporting existing theories or developing new theories. Similarly, a research project may also be an expansion on previous work in the field. So let's look at a couple of the components here that I really like to point out. Previous work, support existing theories, as well as expansion on previous work. And this is key in the scholarly community, is making sure that we attribute previous work that's being done, because it's impossible for us to continue on with research without first acknowledging what's come before us, and that's very, very important. So before we move on, I really just want to reiterate what plagiarism is. Plagiarism is presenting, whether intentionally or not, the ideas, expression of ideas or works of others as one's own. Plagiarism includes reproducing or paraphrasing portions of someone else's published or unpublished, remember, it can be published or unpublished material, regardless of the source, and presenting these as one's own without proper citation or reference to the original source. Again, taken right out of the academic integrity policy at Carleton University. So how do we avoid plagiarism? So we can use things like citations and references to point people to where we got our information. Again, this is very important. So When we say things like citations and references, what do we mean by that? So citations and references attribute ideas and concepts to their sources, and this is done through in-text references, quotations, and footnotes, or at the end of texts such as a bibliography or a reference list. And the word attribute, when we're talking about academic integrity, simply means to acknowledge and give credit to the original source material. So that means where you got your information. There are many reasons why we provide citations and references, and these are just a couple of additional reasons why we might consider adding sources and references to our works. So again, we said that we were using it to identify the research that's come before us, which is extremely important in our research process, but also it shows your reader that you've done proper research by listing sources you've used to get your information. It's also used to be a responsible scholar by giving credit to other researchers and acknowledging their ideas. Remember, I said this in the first video, we are now part of the scholarly community, and this is best practice. We also use it to avoid plagiarism, like we mentioned earlier, by quoting words and ideas used by other authors. But it also acts as a way for your reader to track down the sources that you've used by citing them accurately within your own paper by way of footnotes, bibliography, or reference lists. So this can be a really good way to find additional content if you're struggling to find stuff in your research. That's another reason we might use citations or references, and we'll talk about that later in another video. So there are different citation styles you can use. So citations can be done in about 400 assorted formatting styles around the world. Your professor is going to be able to tell you which exact style they want you to use for your citations and references. Some of the more popular citation styles include APA, which stands for the American Psychological Association, MLA, which is the Modern Language Association, or Chicago style. And many of these styles, though different in the way they look, contain the same information. So let's just have a quick look at some examples here. So you can see I've provided a journal article, and it's been written in APA, MLA, and Chicago. Again, all of our citations include very similar information. You can see we have our authors listed out here. We have our date of publication. We have the title of the journal article, so this is the article title. We also contain the name of the journal in which the article is contained. We have the volume and issue number. We have the DOI, which is also known as the digital object identifier. It can also be portrayed as a URL, like a web URL. And what this is, the way I like to think about a DOI is a fingerprint for a particular journal article. So you can just think about it as a fingerprint. It is a unique identifier for that exact article. And in some cases, we also provide the access dates. You can see when a particular publication or journal or book was accessed. So it's extremely important to make sure that your citations are formatted correctly to ensure that you're complying with academic integrity. Now, the library has several guides on how to cite in various styles, but the most authoritative source about citations are the official guide themselves, and you can see I've listed out a couple of them here. It is important that we use the official citation style guides. The resources the library have are helpful, though. So in our next section, we're going to start looking at ways that we can avoid plagiarism through things like paraphrasing, quoting, as well as exploring citations in greater detail.